issues. So we have a pretty good understanding what's going on in Virginia. We heard last time some of the activity going on in Wyoming around TerraPower and the Natrium project. But I thought it'd be good for Christine to join us and provide a little bit of an update on some of the other state activity, things that might be examples of legislation or initiatives that Virginia could undertake, but also just to kind of understand what's going on outside of Virginia. So with that, Christine, I think we're going to share your slides and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Tom. I appreciate the time and appreciate the time on the agenda and accommodating me. We are hosting our Nuclear Energy Assembly. It's our annual meeting, and actually Dan Stoddard is on our stage right now interviewing the NRC chairman. So just wanted to run back for that one. But so thanks for the time this morning. Really appreciate this opportunity. There's loads to share, so I will try to run through it and happy to have more conversations with folks if you have questions about different policies in the state of play in different states. So a little bit about NEI. We're the National Trade Association that represents the entire nuclear industry. So we've obviously got the big utilities like our good friends at Dominion, but the complete supply chain, and a lot of those folks do sit in Virginia as well. So our membership actually overlaps quite a bit with Phoenix. So happy to have this opportunity to connect with folks. So if you just jump to my first slide, so Tom did ask me to kind of run through a little bit about what is going on in other states. And so this gives you a snapshot of this year and the collection of policies that have passed over the last few years. And so as you can see, the greens are the states that have actually been passed. The blues were considered. Some states adjourned and did not fully pass their bills, but point being that you see a lot of color here. And this is something that we have never seen in the history of the nuclear industry. I've been with NEI for 15 years, and when I started, maybe we would see 5 to 10 bills that would have any impact on nuclear in different states. It just wasn't really much of an appetite from states. And then over the last few years here, there's been a couple of different trends. And this map really just shows you the advanced nuclear trend and the appetite for states to learn more about new nuclear. But over the last couple of years, you've probably seen in the news quite a bit of conversation about preserving nuclear and the value of the existing fleet. And that came in a lot of different shapes and forms, but a lot of the states passed things called ZECs, so zero emission credit programs. There are a handful of states that pass those programs, and they have different clocks and different timelines. So all those states are kind of going through that journey. But really what we saw this year, and we were ready for it in terms of we expected states to be looking at new nuclear, but the scope of policies that states started to consider was much bigger than what we had anticipated. Don't get me wrong, we're very eager to accommodate all of these states interested in nuclear, in new nuclear, but really just want to make sure that we're providing policymakers with the best information so that they can make informed policy decisions. And so with that, if you flip to the next slide, so more interesting, I think, for this group really is the types of policies that have been considered. So this gives you the snapshot of the bills that were introduced this year, specifically around new nuclear. And I'll get to a little bit more about some other policies as well, but just to the point that this gives you an idea of the nature of some of the policies. And some states are in different places than other states. I would certainly put Virginia at the head of the class. Virginia and Idaho are 2 states that have really created forums for thoughtful nuclear technology and policy to be developed over time. Some states were set back by barriers that were put in place years ago. So if you look at states like West Virginia and Connecticut, where they have a nuclear moratorium that needed to be repealed, that's now a hurdle that Virginia has to overcome. So that puts you ahead of some of that kind of the race in nuclear. And then you look at some of the other bills like, task forces, or a big chunk of states really were looking at studying nuclear, and that was a trend that started in Montana this past 2 sessions ago. They passed 2 bills, they repealed their moratorium, and they concurrently passed a bill to study the coal to nuclear transition. And so a lot of these states are looking at different versions of studies, and some of them are full nuclear. Maryland just came out, it's not captured in this slide. Maryland Energy Administration just provided a grant to X Energy to study a full nuclear transition. But just to the point that there's different versions of what a feasibility study would look like. And frankly, I'm a fan of that. I think that they all should look different. States are very different in what they need and what their profile looks like. So I really do think this is a smart approach in terms of how states are looking at this. And then some of the bills are really specific to accommodating a specific project. So in Wyoming, if that bill was really meant to accommodate the Natrium project being deployed. In Alaska, there's a microreactor to be deployed at an Air Force base, and then they've identified another location for another microreactor. And those bills were really specific to trying to make sure that those projects were being encouraged. But the general trend here really is, and this is how I kind of characterize it to a lot of audiences, states want to learn more about nuclear, and they want to know what they can do next to encourage this business into their states. And that's something that, Virginia has done for a long time. So I would certainly say, again, you're a little bit ahead of the class, so we're all catching up to you across the country. Just jump to the next slide. So I do just want to mention the work that's being done that's not policy-oriented. So there's a number of demonstration projects with, I guess you've heard from TerraPower and some other folks. Maybe you've heard from UAMPS or some other folks around these projects, but these are the states where there's really important work being done around stakeholder engagement. And so they're not passing bills necessarily, but they are doing a lot of the work in terms of encouraging community support and making sure that the community is informed and there's public forums to share information, to answer questions, because the projects are actually being deployed in these states. Washington and Wyoming have the demonstration projects. Idaho has the carbon-free power project that is meant to be deployed at the Idaho National Lab. And then in Tennessee, you've got Tennessee Valley Authority that just committed to a new nuclear program. So it's very exciting for that entire Appalachian region, actually. But just to the point that there's a lot of work being done that is not necessarily policy-oriented, but it's still very important to new nuclear deployment. And then finally, the next slide is just some mentions of some of the other pieces of legislation or policies that are just really important to nuclear and impact nuclear, but it doesn't necessarily come in the form of bills. In North Carolina, I don't know if folks followed last year, they passed a big decarbonization bill, and that was sent to the Public Utility Commission and essentially directed Duke Energy to put together a plan for how they're going to decarbonize. And they put together some scenarios, and all of their scenarios included new nuclear. So just terrific. So all the options include the existing fleet and new nuclear and how they're going to reach the goal. And then in Louisiana, I'll touch on some of these, just to the point that the government put together a climate plan that explicitly recognizes nuclear. And so it's important for us to just see these different programs that recognize nuclear, however it comes. And then finally, my last slide is, a lot of the work that NEI does is on the national scale. So we are looking at, we do follow the trends in the states overall, and where we're invited, we do engage in some state policy conversations and do some of that work. But we do a lot of our work with national organizations of state policymakers. And so these are some of the partners that we work with. And I'll just share that, this is the work that I do kind of every day with some other folks on the team. And all of these organizations are hungry for information. They want to learn about nuclear. They want to have nuclear as a part of the conversation. I was just at the Republican Governors Association meeting, and nuclear was right up front with all the other generators in a clean energy discussion. So it's just terrific to be a part of these conversations and making sure that we steer the ship correctly and make sure that policymakers have the best informed information before they make their policy decisions. So happy to dig deeper into any of the other state policies, but that's kind of a snapshot of what's going on. There's loads going on. I would just, the numbers that I point people to is 8 states have passed bills this year to encourage new nuclear. And then you've also got other states like Maryland that passed a big climate package that recognizes the existing asset of Albert Cliffs. So it's coming in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. And I think that's the right approach because every state is so different. So I'm excited to see what Virginia does next and happy to help in whatever that looks like. And thanks for your time, folks.
So I have one. So there's a lot of different positive activity there. But I would say the profile of states is pretty diverse, right? Like I don't think there's one specific through line there. But what do you think is maybe the top three, or what's motivating the states to act? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's the right question. It's a smart question in terms of what's behind a lot of these bills, and it does differ by state. I think a few years ago we kind of saw a big trend from maybe some of the bluer states in terms of environmental goals, carbon credit goals. Virginia being one of them in terms of setting a 100% clean energy standard, and a lot of those states have passed them and now have to figure out how they're going to enact how you're going to reach those goals. And then you've got another bucket of states like in West Virginia specifically, and I would point to that one, and Nebraska. Those are two states. So Nebraska has passed 2 bills now. They're studying SMRs, and they added a tax incentive program for new nuclear. And then in West Virginia, a coal-heavy state, right? And they passed a nuclear moratorium repeal within each of their legislative session starting, and a full trifecta of support. I mean, overwhelming bipartisan votes, House, Senate, Governor just signed it quickly. Just really surprising. And it didn't get a lot of attention, but right after West Virginia passed this moratorium repeal, they passed a resolution that essentially said they need a reliable grid, and nuclear energy is the way that you're going to get there. So they were specifically calling out reliability as their big need. And then I would also point to Nebraska as their anchor to this entire conversation is reliability. But then when you look to Wyoming, they're certainly looking at coal closures as a threat to their communities and their economy, and what are they going to do about that? Same goes for like a Montana, where they're looking at that coal to nuclear transition. That's heavily driven in economics and the jobs, and the fact that nuclear jobs are paid 30% higher than the average energy job. Those things really resonate with state policymakers about how they're welcoming new businesses into their community. So just to the point, I do think that the motivation is varying. So I can't point to one thing, but I would say with some of the redder states, it's certainly they're looking more at reliability and the economy. And then you've got some other states that are looking at the carbon-free attribute of nuclear as the biggest asset. So sorry, that was a little rambling, but it does vary by state.
That's good. Just a variant playing off of Tom's question in your answer. Are you seeing in states from the clean energy aspect, sort of I'll call industry weighing in for, and I'm thinking more those who consume large amounts or a lot of processed heat, would rather be on the clean path, or maybe in their states they have X goals that they need to adhere to. I'm curious how that's playing in at the state legislature levels, and if it is at all, and feeding into at least, hey, let's at least look at nuclear as an option.
Yeah. And again, it has varied a little bit in terms of just the policy that the consumer, the large consumers are supporting. So there was a lot of opposition, like in New Jersey and maybe less so in Illinois, around the zero emission credit programs. When they're looking at the cost of their generation, and it might potentially go up. But then you look at, I don't know if folks heard about this one, and I'm happy to send it around, but Nucor Steel, who made a huge investment in West Virginia, they decided they were going to put one of their manufacturing facilities, the $2 billion, and that's a huge investment for the state of West Virginia. They came out with an agreement with NuScale And they said that they want to look at SMRs as a potential supplier for their facilities. They're doing that because that's what their customers are demanding. They don't want to have their generation coming from a non-clean source. So just to the point that there's definitely, I would say, varying interest in terms of some of those connections, but that is, we are definitely seeing it come out in a lot of states. It just depends on kind of who the stakeholders in the state might be.
I think and just an anecdote on that, one of the things that was interesting, the debate, and Christine was heavily involved in this, the debate a few years ago in Illinois that had actually bled into, what was it, 2 years ago and last year on the sort of ZEC program, but I forget what exactly they call it. But one of the big discussions was about the cost to consumers potentially going up by maintaining the nuclear plants, and what's actually happened, especially in the last, 6 months or so to a year, as natural gas prices have started to increase exponentially, the cost of nuclear doesn't change that much. That was one of the arguments that was making, like, yes, it may be a little bit more expensive at the time, but it's not going to see these wild swings, and natural gas now is, $9, $10 a BTU, which is 3 times what it was then, is really having an impact on the price, and nuclear is actually a much cheaper option. So it's actually saving, the fact that they kept those plants online is actually saving the ratepayers money in Illinois. So I think, it's one of those things that what they call it, the fuel surcharge hedge that nuclear brings, because it's not a volatile resource, especially in competitive markets, is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to build on that, I was at a conference last week where a representative of Constellation said that had the program not been in place, they'd be making more money with their nuclear plants today than what they're limited to under the terms of that agreement. So
right.
They would have been better off had it not passed, but of course at the time it was the...
Yeah, they also wouldn't have had the nuclear plants still running, I guess.
That's
right. So, yeah. Any other questions for Christine? All right, well, thank you, Christine. Thank you for carving out time. I know it's busy up there with NEA, so I appreciate you joining us, and we'll stay in touch, I'm sure, as we keep moving things ahead. Thanks again.
Absolutely, happy to, anytime. Have a good day.
Thank
You too.